Since the ending of the Game of Thrones series, there have been a lot of complaints about the decline in quality. The ending was very disappointing because the show started off so great and had so much potential. Yet there are many reasons for their decline, and I'm going to talk about them today. So the first and most important reason for the decline, they ran out of books. The show was at its best when it followed the example of the books. Now, some could say that as the show went on, they changed so much that the books didn't matter. Like, I am still reading A Dance with Dragons, but so much is different between the show and book. I think George R.R. Martin referred to it as a butterfly or ripple effect.
Changes will come into effect, what I call the butterfly effect. A small change can produce large changes later on. These kind of butterfly effect things may produce changes down the road. I advise Dan and David whenever they're about to hit the butterfly effect, and sometimes they change according to that, and sometimes they plunge ahead. So
once they changed one thing in earlier seasons, it affected things in later seasons, and they had to change other things because of that one change. I think the last full season that followed the books was season 5. But another argument for this reason is, the show decline when they ran out of books, is that in the earlier seasons, even though they changed details, they still followed the format of the books. When they ran out of books, they stopped following the format. In TV writing, there is something that all TV writers must be able to do: write a spec script. A spec script is basically a standalone episode of a show that a writer uses for not only a writing sample, but to also show that they can mimic the tone and plot format of the show. A spec script is basically a standalone episode of the show that a writer uses as a writing sample to not only show that they're a good writer, but that they can mimic the tone of the show. Because the show has many writers, to keep it from being all over the place, the writers must all write using the same tone and plot format. I've written spec scripts for shows like Criminal Minds and Entourage. I wanted to have a 1-hour drama sample plus a half-hour comedy sample. In writing these, I had to basically mimic the voice of the characters as well as how each show plots out its plot. So how does this relate to Game of Thrones? Also, it was adapted from the book series A Song of Ice and Fire. In the early seasons, it followed very closely its tone and plot format. Once they no longer had any books to follow, they stopped following the plot format. It's like they couldn't figure out how to take the outline they were given and flesh it out so that it would play out the same way it would in the books. And as I have stated before, this is a very important skill for TV writers. The fact that they didn't write the later seasons like they wrote the earlier seasons show that they either didn't know how to or didn't care to replicate the same tone and plot format as before. The next reason is the last 2 seasons were rushed. We all know that HBO would have given them the time and the money to do it right. They could have had more and longer episodes. They could have had another season. But David and DB were too eager to leave Game of Thrones so they can do their Star Wars movies. The fact is this: they should have left after the 6th season rather than rush the 7th and 8th seasons. I get it. The show was a massive hit, but you were ready to move on. Other show creators have gracefully bowed out when they were ready to move on and let the show continue without them. Like Miles Miller and Al Gough of Smallville, Alan Ball of True Blood, Shonda Rhimes of Grey's Anatomy. The list goes on. They selflessly decided to let the show go on without them, and they moved on to other projects. But David and DB were either too arrogant or too greedy to let the show go on without them. In the end, they didn't even get to make the Star Wars movies anyway. Because they rushed the plot along, they also rushed character development. I have already done a video about Daenerys' steep descent into madness. I think this needed an entire season to play out. But if you want to watch the video and see all of my arguments against this steep descent, I will put a card of the video here. Also, journeys that before took several episodes to make, now are done in minutes. Important character development used to happen along the way. And it was a better way to set up certain plot points that would later pay off. I get it. Game of Thrones was a very slow-moving story in the beginning, and it needed to speed up by the end. But not at the speed of light. I have stated before that my least favorite thing in a story, whether it be book, TV show, or movie, is the because plot point. That's when things happen with no regards to character or previous situations because the plot needs it to. Well, Tyrion Lannister's character was ruined simply because the plot needed him to make massive mistakes. Tyrion Lannister was a beloved character because he was so intelligent and clever and talked himself out of many dire situations. But because he lined up with Daenerys, all of a sudden he keeps making dire mistakes.
Come on, son.
This is when he should have been at his strongest. This is when he should have showed just how wrong Tywin was about him. He was making very Cersei-like mistakes, and I didn't like it, nor did any of his many fans. Now, a great example of both character development and a plot setup and payoff is the Red Wedding. Long before the Red Wedding, you had Robb promise Walder Frey that he would marry one of his daughters just so he can cross the twins. And then Robb marries someone else. You knew that his retribution was going to be coming, but you didn't know how. And you also see at some point, I guess a few episodes before, Tywin is writing a letter that we now know he was writing to Walder Frey, basically letting him know that if Walder Frey commits this heinous act that nobody in Westeros would ever respect, that he would have the support of the crown. So Walder Frey commits the Red Wedding. And all of this was character development and plot development that took place over many episodes. Not one, many. Jon Snow. He was a popular character for many reasons, but I think the main one was his leadership skill. He's very much like Daenerys in that way. Reading A Dance with Dragons after watching the show, you can see how Jon's story paralleled with Daenerys's. He was all about the big picture, saving mankind. Daenerys, in a way, was the same. But once he was aligned with Daenerys, everything that made him a great character disappeared. Like, simply because he was in love, he no longer knew how to maneuver amongst people he knew his entire life. Like, I get it. He was honorable.
And I've already pledged myself to Queen Daenerys of House Targaryen.
Then there is nothing left to discuss. The dead will come north first. Enjoy dealing with them. We will deal with whatever is left of you.
But the honorable decision he should have made was staying king and remaining loyal to the people that put him in that position, because he knew they would not like it if he bowed the knee, and he knew he needed them in the fight. There is also the fact that several things were never addressed, like prophecies. The biggest one being the prince who was promised. Was it Jon?
You still have Jon Snow now.
He's the prince that was promised.
Or Daenerys?
Bosses bantis amazis, merikivio dolalaris os machagon contas.
The prince who was promised will bring the dawn.
Or both?
That noun has no gender in High Valyrian, so the proper translation for that prophecy would be the prince or princess who was promised will bring the dawn.
Cersei's prophecy almost completely came true.
You'll never wed the prince. You'll wed the king. You'll be queen. For a time. Then comes another. Younger. More beautiful. To cast you down and take all you hold dear. The king will have 20 children, and you will have 3. Gold will be their crowns. Gold, their shrouds.
Except for the part where she is choked to death by her little brother. That could mean Tyrion or Jaime. I have done a video where I said it should have been Arya wearing a Jaime face. That video can be seen here. Then there is Dorne. There was a coup where the prince and his heir were murdered, and Ellaria and her sand snakes took over. But Ellaria and her daughter eventually died. Dorne was represented in the finale, but who the hell was he? Also, they sent Jon to the Night's Watch, but now we know they were supposed to be protecting Westeros from the White Walkers, not the Wildlings. Like, it's even in the name, Night's Watch. They were supposed to be waiting for the long night. So what are they doing now? And Jon hinted that Daenerys could probably still have kids.
I can't have children.
Who told you that?
The witch who murdered my husband.
Has it occurred to you she might not have been a reliable source of information?
But it was dropped and never brought up again. And the list goes on and on. Even with all these issues, I enjoyed Game of Thrones for what it was up until season 8, episode 3. Everything after that was unbearable. It was basically a speed run to the finish line. Daenerys' steep descent into madness. Jon announcing to his sisters that he is Aegon Targaryen, yet it never came up in the final council meeting that decided his fate. It should have and could have saved him from being exiled. Cersei's disappointing death, and the moment fans have been waiting for since the first season. Who would end up on the Iron Throne? None other than Bran the Broken.
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
So I, like many other fans, am patiently waiting for the winds of winter and a dream of spring, so I can see how it really is.
The novels are novels, the TV series is the TV series. And they're two different beasts. The two beasts are the two beasts, and each one is separate from the other.
So were you disappointed at the ending of Game of Thrones? Who did you think would end up on the Iron Throne? Tell me in the comments below. Also, tell me if there's something you'd like to see me talk about. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification to know the next time I upload or go live. Thanks.